Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Carer Knowledge Exchange webinar for today. This is our fifth webinar, and today we're looking at carer identity and empowerment. My name's Eleni Katrakis, and I'm the CEO of Carers New South Wales, and it's fantastic to have so many people joining us today and some fantastic speakers. So I'm going to come to that in a moment. But just to note for everybody that's joining us, this session will be recorded, and we ask that while our presenters are speaking today, that all other attendees please keep their microphones on mute and turn off your videos. There'll be fantastic opportunities later in the session to unmute and to see everybody, but while the presentations are occurring today, if you can limit your questions and comments to the chat, and I think we're all used to commenting in the chat now, so that's the opportunity to ask some questions there. So to start off this morning, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today. For me, here in North Sydney, it's the Gorigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. But I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from where everybody else is coming from today, and particularly wanting to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, but particularly acknowledging and thinking about Aboriginal carers and the role they play and the important role that they play within their communities, but also thinking about Aboriginal carers within the context of what we're talking about today. So talking about identity and empowerment. So the Carer Knowledge Exchange delivers 3 webinars every year around different focus areas that link to the New South Wales carer strategy. The Knowledge Exchange is a fantastic partnership between Carers New South Wales, the Institute for Public Policy and Governance at UTS, and it's funded by the New South Wales Government. It is very much about connecting a whole range of people, connecting carers, researchers, students, decision makers, professionals and service providers to share their knowledge about carers and to learn from each other through knowledge exchange and translation. So today's webinar was really informed by one of the webinars that we did last year. So the one that we did in August 2022, which explored the relationship between carer identification and carer wellbeing. So one of the themes that emerged from that was the connection between carers' identity and their empowerment. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So our speakers today are very diverse and varied and bring a whole range of different experience to us. So we're going to hear from 2 carers firstly around their lived experience. Then we're going to hear from 2 additional speakers from both a policy and a research perspective. Following those presentations, we'll take a short break at around 11:30, and then we'll reconvene for a series of facilitated breakout room discussions. And then we'll end the day very calmly and in a lovely way with a guided meditation that will be delivered from our carer in residence, Prudence Granger, which will really focus on what we're talking about and what we really want to aim for and think about, which is carer health and wellbeing. So to our first speakers. So our first 2 speakers today, Keith Davies and Peter Swindle. Now, they're both unusual in that they're both men and they're both carers. Now, that's not to say that men don't care. I'm not saying that. But male carers are often hidden, and male carers don't often recognise or acknowledge that they are carers. So it is fantastic today to have Peter and Keith here joining us to share their perspectives. So Keith Davies is a retired public primary school principal, and he lives in Leura in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. And for the past 16 years, Keith has been caring for Bev, his wife of 60 years, who has dementia. The last 8 of those years has involved visiting Bev each day and helping to care for her, where she is in residential care in Malvern Gardens in Leura. As a consequence of this, Keith is very active and he's involved with Dementia Australia, Baptist Care New South Wales, Carers New South Wales and the University of Tasmania, and has numerous advocacy and support programs. Peter Swindle's also a former carer for Joyce, his wife. He's a dementia advocate and a volunteer at Morven Gardens Baptist Care in Lura. Joyce was diagnosed with dementia in July 2011, and Peter looked after her at home until January 2015, when she needed the special care that residential aged care could provide. So spending every day at Morven Gardens, it was a natural progression to Peter becoming a volunteer, and he continues to do that and continued to do that after Joyce sadly passed away in July 2017. Peter's also an advocate for those living with dementia and the carers. So Peter and Keith met when both of their wives both entered the same residential aged care in the same week, and they've since become great friends, advocates, supporters for each other and carers in their community. They've both shared their experiences in many different forums at Parliament, and we are very, very privileged to hear their insights today. So we're firstly going to hear from Peter and followed then by Keith. So I'm going to hand over to Peter. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to Darragum Gundagara country here in the Blue Mountains. My name is Peter Swindle. When Joanne asked me for my bio, I knew I'd done a few of these before. Surely I have one on file somewhere. Could I find a suitable one in my document file? Not really. So I looked in my manila folders, filled with previous presentations and forums, and I came across a notebook with questions and some answers. They were from the very early days after my wife had been diagnosed with vascular and Alzheimer's dementia. I was finding it particularly hard to cope with all the demands that a carer experiences day after day, night after night. So I asked Alzheimer's New South Wales, as it was at the time, if I could speak to a counsellor. Some of the questions. What is the best way of organising her wardrobe? How can I help with conversations? Her voice had become very quiet and I wear hearing aids. Joyce was using wrong words and I sometimes didn't understand. There are emotional moments for both of us, sometimes caused by me. How do I get over them? Getting her to do things to occupy her mind, apathy was setting in. I know I should do more, but I'm tired and it makes me irritable. Joyce is worse when tired. She asks, when is Peter coming home? Some answers. Keep her wardrobe simple. Get rid of as much clutter as possible. Give her things that she can do. If you have an appointment, write it on a whiteboard and tell her just before it is due so that she doesn't worry. There are pages and pages of questions and advice. It helped because the counsellor had heard most of them before. I felt much calmer after my hour-long sessions and was more confident that I could cope. I had 6 or 7 counselling sessions in those early days. Probably the best move I ever made to help me be a better carer was to educate myself in dementia. The UTS MOOC courses, Understanding Dementia and Preventing Dementia, were invaluable in giving me the knowledge about the disease. The Department of Health ran e-courses, as they were called, and Dementia Australia had a number of courses to help carers in their roles. Doing the courses at the same time as my friend Keith gave me impetus and encouragement that I sometimes needed after having a particularly bad day. Speaking of my friend Keith, we met when both our wives moved into full-time care at Malvern Gardens, Lura, in the same week. We had met briefly sometime earlier at a local support group. When my wife passed away in 2017, Keith was there to support me. And we continued to encourage each other continually. I'm not sure how I would have coped without him. Carers need support constantly, whether it's a relative, close friend, or support group. Most carers cannot do it on their own. They may think they can, but it will probably be at the detriment to their health. I've always found support groups invaluable. Sometimes they have care workers on hand to help with the person living with dementia, whilst you meet with other family carers and talk over a cup of tea. There aren't enough support groups, particularly here in the Blue Mountains. Baptist Care ran a peer support program, and Keith and I volunteered. We'd go and visit family carers who were finding it difficult. I wish it had been available when I was struggling. Often, all we needed to do was listen. They knew we understood because we'd experienced some of the same problems. We would suggest services that were available and gave them contact numbers. Dementia Australia now runs that program, and I would definitely recommend it for anyone who is finding it difficult to look after a loved one. I hear and read the statement that most people living with dementia would prefer to live at home rather than move into an aged care facility. And the government actively encourages this. It would certainly be beneficial in most cases, I agree. What I don't see accompanying this statement is that in order for this to be successful, services and support needs to be drastically improved to enable the carer to be able to provide a safe and beneficial environment and survive the rigors of caring without their health suffering. I speak from personal experience. After losing a significant amount of weight in a very short time, and my doctor warning me that something needed to change. Whether some of these experiences and thoughts help you care, advise, plan, volunteer, or encourage, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to talk to you today. And remember, the best way of communicating with someone who is living with dementia is to smile, say hello, and introduce yourself. Thank you. And now, Keith.
Greetings from Gundagurra and Darug country in the beautiful Blue Mountains of New South Wales, where it's wet again, but we did have summer last week. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to take part in the webinar, and I thank Carers New South Wales, UTS, the government for the opportunity. Look, it really is a privilege to be a carer, especially for a loved one over a long period of time. Caring requires love, compassion, understanding and commitment, and also energy, stamina and good health. I've had that privilege in caring for my wife Bev over a period approaching 17 years, almost a third of our married life together. Over the past 8 years, I've assisted in Bev's care each day, along with the wonderful folk at Baptist Care Malvern Gardens in Lura. In all that time, I've been blessed by great support from family, friends, community members, organisations such as Carers New South Wales, Dementia Australia, and a range of professionals. Caring comes in all shapes and sizes and is usually intensely personal. Each carer brings their own perspective to what they do. There's no perfect carer, and there are many different ways to care, all appropriate in their own way. Some carers endeavour to do it all themselves, but carers need all the support they can get, and it behoves our society and our governments to recognise and act upon this. As a beginning carer, life can be extremely challenging, frustrating, and exhausting. A major problem is in having little knowledge or understanding of the condition that needs care. In Bev's and my case, her dementia. For many of us, and our society in general, dementia is virtually an unknown quantity until direct contact with it occurs. A few things to consider. Find out as much as you can about your loved one's condition and the best way of caring that will enable quality of life. In my case, I turned initially to the then Australia's Alzheimer's Australia website and helpline and found their series of fact sheets invaluable. I also scoured the internet, liaised with our GP, and after a time took up the University of Tasmania's offer of their free MOOCs. As a volunteer at Morven Gardens, I was also able to access helpful advice and information. Subsequently, through Baptist Care, Dementia Australia offers comprehensive programs for carers covering both understanding dementia and practical help with caring. Most recently, they've established a peer support program which has great potential. Another thing to consider is that you need to seek support as early as possible and be prepared to accept whatever support is available. My wife Bev was in complete denial of her condition. I admired her for that as she fought back, but it certainly complicated our situation. It meant that for a long period of time, we both endeavoured to hide what was really going on. Fortunately, I had understanding and awareness from our children, our respective siblings and friends. It was a lonely time, and my general observations since then indicate that this need to cover up the situation is not uncommon, especially in the early stages. As the need for care escalates, appropriate support for the carer becomes even more crucial, so continue to seek it out. You need to investigate what federal, state and community level specific support there is and how it can be accessed. The trick is in knowing how to find out about it, and then the next trick is how to get to it. The federal government's My Aged Care and the Carers Gateway are good starting places, but in the case of the former, can be very difficult and frustrating to navigate. Obviously, the state health departments and allied health offer specific avenues of help. Having a good GP, as was our experience, is critical in this regard. At a community level, organisations such as neighbourhood centres can be very useful. You need to try to avoid carer burnout. Your caring will come to an abrupt halt if you fall over. Even though it may seem impossible at the time, there is a critical need for the carer's health and well-being to be monitored and maintained throughout the period of care. Sleep deprivation can be a case in point. Try to maintain any existing friendships and networks, and even establish new ones. Being cut off from others is certainly unhelpful for your well-being. Be prepared to accept whatever respite you can get for yourself and for your loved one. Respite is available, but in most instances, it's almost impossible to access. The demand grossly overrides the supply. Nevertheless, it's important to a carer that these avenues be explored and when available, they be used. Be prepared to accept and manage changes over time. Circumstances do change. The most dramatic change is clearly that when caring at home is no longer an option. This stage is often critical and hugely emotional for a carer and for everyone else involved. Carer guilt can be overwhelming. Prior to reaching this stage, it's important that steps are taken early to lessen the impact for when that time comes. Legal and financial affairs, plus possible care placement options, should be in place. As I said at the outset, caring is a privilege. Despite the huge challenges, demands and frustrations and associated feelings of guilt, there can be a degree of satisfaction in knowing that you're doing your best and that deep down your loved one is benefiting from your care. There's also the opportunity to be involved in relevant organisations, education and research programs associated with your loved one's condition and your role as a carer. My final advice is, if possible, find a person who is in the same boat as yourself and form a friendship and support situation one-on-one. This I did with Peter. Over a long period of time and continuing into the future, Peter has been a huge part of my caring and my well-being. To all carers, and for those for whom they provide care, the challenges can be overwhelming but achievable. Similarly, for those individuals and organisations who advocate on our behalf, and for those who undertake research and make policy, there are huge challenges ahead. I wish them all well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter and Keith. Thank you for sharing your personal stories of care and the challenges that you face, but also I think the importance of identifying as a carer and really advocating for carer support and understanding what carers need. And I think showing the importance, really both of you around that peer support, providing that, I suppose, acknowledgement of that need for support then opens up those other opportunities. And I think you've both displayed that. So really great points and things that you've raised today. And I think it will be great to carry on that discussion later in the session in the breakout groups. So thank you both very, very much. We're moving on to our next speaker this morning. So our third speaker is Catherine Lowry, who's the New South Wales Mental Health Commissioner, who was appointed as Commissioner in 2017. And to this role, she's brought over 30 years experience leading and delivering major strategic and complex mental health projects at the state and national level. She's held positions at local health district, state government, federal government levels, understands the systemic issues people and services face when accessing and providing support. And she's a really passionate supporter of lived experience being at the core of mental health reform. She's deeply committed to improving the lives of people living with mental health issues and strengthening the communities that support them. She recently led the development of Living Well in Focus 2020 to 2024, which is the updated New South Wales strategic plan for community recovery, wellbeing and mental health in New South Wales. So I'm going to hand over now to Catherine Lowry, and this is a recorded session and discussion. So Catherine's presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine Lowry, the Mental Health Commissioner of New South Wales, and I'm very pleased to be able to join with you today at this New South Wales Carer Symposium. Today, I'd like to talk to you about a project of the Commission's, which is the New South Wales Health Literacy Initiative. The aim of the Health Literacy Initiative was to improve health services to make it easier for people with a lived experience of mental health issues, their carers, families and kinship groups to access, understand and use information and services to manage their health. The voice of lived experience of consumers and carers was a key part to understanding the best way to design this initiative, and I will talk about that in the presentation today. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land that we work on every day. I respect their elders past and present and all Aboriginal people, especially those we touch base with as part of our work. In New South Wales, we have a population of approximately 8 million people. And using the Ophelia process, which is optimising health literacy and access, the Commission focused on organisation responsiveness rather than changing an individual's behaviour in growing the health literacy across our community. We wanted to support health workers, services and organisations to recognise and accommodate people's diverse traditions and health literacy strengths, needs and preferences. We wanted to create enabling environments that optimise equitable access to and engagement with health information and services, and to support the health and wellbeing of individuals, families, groups and communities. We worked with the New South Wales Primary Health Networks as the delivery mechanism for this work. Primary health care is the foundation of a strong health system. It leads to more equitable health outcomes across the community and leads to greater patient and health worker satisfaction. Taking a primary health approach is about meeting the majority of the people's health needs through services provided directly in the community where they live. So the work in the Health Literacy Initiative focused on supporting health organisations and health professionals to promote equitable access and engagement for all people in the community. We defined mental health literacy responsive organisations and services as meeting the diverse mental health literacy strengths, needs and preferences of all people, and supporting individuals with lived experience, their families and kinship groups and communities to make decisions regarding their health and wellbeing. In short, identifying and responding to health literacy needs, strengths and preferences supports the mental health and physical wellbeing of people with a lived experience of mental health issues and their carers. So let's talk about health equity, because that is tied so closely to health literacy. Health literacy is fundamental to improving a person's health outcomes and health equity across population groups. Health literacy also has an economic impact through direct and indirect healthcare costs, rates and numbers of years living with disability and chronic conditions and quality of life. Addressing mental health literacy is critical to achieve lower mortality, better health equity and wellbeing for people with lived experience of mental health issues, especially those with severe illness who experience high rates of mortality and reduced life expectancy. So we know that we can have equal opportunity to look over the fence of health literacy, but that doesn't mean everyone gets a view. Equity is about getting everyone that view, but we know in reality that's not the case at all. So health literacy and equity development under these conditions of reality really are profound constraints on the ability of people to make decisions and be informed in a way that supports their decisions about their own health. So mental health literacy helps people understand how to identify when they're experiencing a mental health issue and what causes these experiences, empowering them to work both with and independently of services to improve their health. It informs early help seeking and the use of health services and facilitates collaboration to achieve recovery. The mental health literacy responsiveness of organisations shapes both their accessibility and effectiveness in supporting understanding of preventative and restorative strategies for managing mental health and physical health problems. In conjunction with broader responses at community and system levels, this can potentially reduce dependence on services and contribute to improved equity and health outcomes for people with lived experience of mental health issues or of caring and kin and communities. So this is where we really want to move to, removing system barriers. And that for us could only be done in collaboration with the voice of lived experience. So we asked the question, how can we use health literacy responsiveness to make liberation usual practice? So the voice of people with lived experience of mental health issues and caring is increasingly recognised and valued in the redesign, delivery and review of services across New South Wales. Embedding a co-design approach with people with lived experience and carers, families and kin was crucial to the success of this initiative. The voice of carers were part of the fabric of this initiative. Carers were in every part of this initiative, from governance at the very beginning to design and production. The Commission used both funded arrangements and in-kind contributions to support a multi-layered engagement strategy to deeply understand the needs of people with lived experience of mental health issues and their carers, families and kin, and what was necessary for health services to respond to these needs. The comprehensive co-design process, including 8 priority groups, 10 New South Wales primary health networks and an extensive cross-sector governance group, are unprecedented for this kind of health service improvement. In the project, the 8 priority groups that were identified included First Nations people, such as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and Pacific Islander peoples, people living with disabilities, culturally and linguistically diverse groups, sexuality and gender diverse people, people living in rural and remote communities, young people, older adults with a lived experience. This slide shows some videos that are available on our website if you want to hop onto the New South Wales Mental Health Commission website and look for the Health Literacy Initiative. You'll see there many videos where people have been talking about their experiences, and this is part of our resource, not only to have those voices inform the project itself, but also to enable others to understand and hear those voices, and perhaps also to learn and feel confident that those voices were absolutely embedded into this work. As this slide shows, over 1,000 voices were heard, listened to and contributed to the process, the product and the implementation. By having focus groups and by having a really clear and coordinated approach to engagement with the people with lived experience, the people who really were the focus of why we wanted organisational health responsiveness to be stronger and more informed, was because we wanted to ensure that even the softest voice in our consultations was heard as much as the loudest voice. Everyone has their own experiences, and we wanted that to inform our work so that at the end of our product, we would have something that was meaningful and useful and would make a difference. So this initiative generated strong practice and evidence-based recommendations to advance health literacy responsiveness in Australia. This work identified 11 action areas that have been grouped into 3 dimensions: connections between health services and the community, access to help at the right time in easy, friendly ways, and training and capacity building in health and community services. The research consortium used 11 action areas to guide development of a mental health literacy responsiveness framework and a suite of education and training materials that have been used by New South Wales primary health networks and other organisations to encourage a mental health literate and responsive approach to practice. And these resources are available on the New South Wales Mental Health Commission's webpage. There is evidence that we're pleased to say that the framework supported the development and implementation of a range of health responsiveness promoting activities across New South Wales. There was a shift towards mental health promotion and away from clinical service focus. The initiative contributed to enhancing organisational mental health literacy responsiveness. There were examples of system-level integration of mental health literacy responsiveness into organisational policy and processes. And that was one of the aims that I outlined at the beginning of this presentation, that we can improve the health literacy of people. But when you go through that door to get a service or to share your concerns about your health, we need the other side to also be able to respond in a way that will not only empower the client, but also provide information and guidance about how people can make decisions in order to best manage their health. I really want to, again, thank all of those people who participated in our process. And I also wanted to outline and share this process with you all, because at the Mental Health Commission of New South Wales, the voice of lived experience is at the heart of what we do. And we embed that into our practice. And I think you can see just from this quick outline today that the voice of people with lived experience of mental health issues and of caring families and kinship groups is embedded, that their voices are important, as people with lived experience are the experts on their own journey. And their expertise and sharing of that expertise into projects such as this mean that our work is not only enhanced by having that knowledge contributing to it, but it also gives, for us, a real strong avenue to have lived experience leadership at the forefront of our work and that expertise to be embedded. So I want to thank all of those people who have contributed to our project. The results will not be as strong, nor would they be as responsive to the needs. And of course, this project is about health literacy responsiveness. I hope you found it interesting. And I also, again, want to thank New South Wales Carers for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks to Catherine for that really fantastic presentation. I think looking at the Health Literacy Project, but also that importance of co-design, really empowering carers, giving carers that voice and everybody else that participated within that project. And I think the important point that, one of the important points that Catherine made near the end there was around that you can be empowered to go to a service. You also need the service to then be responsive once you go there. And I think that sort of inclusive project has really shown the benefits for that. So again, great points raised that I hope everyone will pick up in discussion later today. So we are moving, we're a little bit ahead of time, but that's okay because that gives us more time for discussion later on. So the fourth speaker for today and the final speaker for today is Dr. So Sin Sim, who is a lecturer and researcher in occupational therapy at Monash University. So Sin has 15 years of clinical experience in Singapore, particularly in the field of mental health, and has worked across acute, rehab and community mental health sectors before moving on to teaching at the occupational therapy program at Nanyang Polytechnic in Singapore in 2012. So Sin recently completed her PhD with Monash University, conducting research with mothers of children with disability. So Sin will share insights from her PhD research, a qualitative study with northeastern and southeastern migrant mothers of children with disability, and discuss some of her findings related to carer identity and empowerment and improved wellbeing and participation. So thank you very much.
Well, I feel very, very excited and privileged to be here, and hearing from Peter and Keith, right, I really felt like, you know, this work that we do in this space is really, really important because, you know, it's about a gathering of people who care about carers, who work really hard behind the scenes. So I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that my sharing can be translated into the different space, you know, whichever space you are as a carer or people who are developing things for carers. I hope that there will be some insights you can gain from my findings of my research. Right, so, hang on. Right. So what's my research about? So I think the Eleanor has kind of done a little bit of introduction. So my focus is really on Chinese mothers of children with disabilities. That's really a very specific, population. And what I was really interested in knowing, right, is that what do mothers do with their time? And because I'm an occupational therapist, I'm particularly interested in people's activities, their use of time, what are their valued roles, and what are their sense of self, you know, as they go through their day, you know, caring for their child. And also, you know, what other things do they do? Do they have time to do it? I'm like, you know, I was really with this curiosity, rather, I was going to find out. And as occupational therapists, we always wondered about the well-being of people. We care about the well-being. We believe that engagement in meaningful occupations is important for well-being. So my question was really, right, when I started out the whole project was, right, what is the impact of engagement in meaningful occupations for carers, you know, in this space? Do they just care or do they do other things? And what does this caring occupation mean to them? So then with that, right, I started to do what we call a scoping review or literature review about what's out there, you know, in this population. And I found that actually what is important in my first finding was that cultural influence shaped the activities and roles of Chinese mothers of children with disabilities. And I think that if we think about just not the Chinese population, but if you work with CALD population in your work, you realize that every culture will have their own, you know, value systems and health beliefs, right, that really influences what they do and what they see as important. And sometimes it can pose immense challenges in service providers because it's not the same. Right, so the thing that I discovered about the Chinese culture, which I'm also from, right, is stigma. So those of you who have worked with people from the collectivist culture, you realize that, you know, in collectivist culture, right, the people, in a way, it's good that they gather together, they support each other. But when something goes wrong, it may go one way or the other way. So in this case, where I've got mothers of children with disabilities, the things that I found out was that moms, right, felt the shame and they feel the pressure from people around, including their own families, like mother-in-law, father-in-law, grandparents, even their own husbands, right? That, you know, hey, you know, you have given me a child with disabilities. And it's like, it's almost like it's your fault. You know, why do we have this? And it's like bad karma. You know, for those of you who understand a little bit about karma and, you know, thinking in the Buddhism and Taoism space, right, they do believe in retribution. So what happens is that moms get blamed for, you know, giving birth to the child with disabilities. And that is what moms share, you know, in those literature around that. And the other thing that complicates the issue, right, is this idea of Confucianism, right, it's not confusion, it's Confucianism in Chinese culture, where there's this Chinese philosophy of how mothers are very, very responsible for bringing up their children in a way that's prim and proper, towards academic excellence, towards being a very successful person in society. which you can see around. You know, I mean, if you have Chinese family, right? They are very into education. They send their kids onto Saturday Chinese class. They send them for scholarship programs and all that. So that's all coming from that, you know, Confucianism philosophy. So with a child with disabilities, right, the parents feel like their hopes are dashed, basically, like, you know, my life is gone. I've got a child with disability. Oh no, what do I do? So that's what's also coming out from the literature. So with that sort of background, right, what happens is that mothers, right, have a very low self-esteem about themselves. So they kind of internalize this stress and this pressure. They believe it themselves that it's their fault as well, you know, being in that culture. And they have very restricted social and community participation because they are like, you know, I can't go out with this child. It's embarrassing. You know, I can't manage it. It's going to make me look bad. And, you know, hence they become very isolated. And also within the family, there's a lot of tension as well because of this sort of like a disagreement about what you should be doing and not be doing the child. But the one thing that I find very a surprise for me when I was looking through the literature was that despite all these difficulties, right, moms are working very diligently, right, and sacrificially to improve their children's status. And they are trying very hard to recover them and bring them to the best they can. So that's the beautiful thing that I found from that literature review. So when I designed my study, right, I had 2 phases. So one is an interview phase where I had a group of 11 moms living in Victoria, because that's where I'm from, Victoria, and finding out what's going on in their space. You know, is it the same as the literature that I found, or is it different being an immigrant mom? And the second phase that I had, right, was a cross-sectional survey across Chinese mom carers over different countries. Like I was doing some in Taiwan, Singapore, and as well as Australia, just to see whether there are similarities and differences. So just sharing you the findings from the first phase where I was focusing on immigrant Chinese mothers. Actually, they are not really Chinese. They are like, you know, I include Japanese as well, just loosely calling them Chinese here because they're basically East Asian, you know, they've got East Asian cultural influences. Yeah. So what I found out, right, this is a really complicated chart. Just let me take you through it. So if you focus on being the carer, right, I found that, you know, moms do the same things. I think if all those of you who are carers here, you will find that there are some similarities. You're just sort of occupied with, you know, the person's care. And you're just busy all day long. You're very sacrificial. You can't go to a party because you have to care. You can't go and do something that you like because you have to care. You can't even sleep because you have to care. You know, those kind of sacrificial activities, right, that you do is quite similar. The thing that I find really moving in one of the interviews that I had, right, was a mom that told me, you know, I really want to live up to 98 years old. I don't even want to die. So when I asked her, she shared with me very openly it's very emotional for me at that point when I was hearing her. She was saying that, you know, if I die early, right, no one is going to look after my daughter. You know, she really needs me. And I'm at this point, I don't see who can look after me as well as I can. So that was one of the findings I find. It's a common thread throughout the participants' wish and desire that they want to see their child in good hands before they could leave the world in that sense. Yeah. And I also find that moms, right, the immigrant moms become an advocate, like just like some of you, become an advocate for their children. So they are like going to schools and saying that, hey, this needs to be done. They're going to services and say, hey, why are we not having this and that? So they become more active in the process. And I call that like a mastery. If you can see a little box here that says mastery, I find that they're really mastering their carer role very well. Way and beyond what they could imagine when they first started out the journey in tears and, you know, and really sad. So they become strong. And, you know, with immigrant moms, they've got additional challenges. So what I expect was that I would find them struggling with the, you know, oh my goodness, I can't speak English and, oh, you know, I don't understand the system and all that. But surprisingly, the mothers actually, right, picked up very quickly all these things very quickly because, you know, they want their child to be really well. And they master the environment. Not just that, right? They also start to share with me all the positivities of being in where they are. So despite being away from their family, being, you know, having to adjust to a difficult environment, you know, and early years of migration, all the struggles of loneliness, isolation, they kind of put it at the back and said that the pros outweighs the cons of being in Australia. And I think being someone from Singapore, right, I can understand where they're coming from because where they came from, you know, whether in Japan or China or Korea, wherever it is, the system in Australia is really, it's very commendable. And at that time, NDIS has just rolled out maybe a couple of years, and they were the group that were transiting from a non-NDIS environment to a NDIS environment. And they were full of praises for NDIS. They are like, without NDIS, I couldn't have done this. Without NDIS, I wouldn't be able to have this, you know, 1 hour to go and do an exercise. Without NDIS, there won't be any funding to get all this equipment in that can really help me take care of my child better. So, I mean, I don't know whether there are NDIS people here, but I think that you know, of course, that is not a perfect system, but it's really a very precious initiative, right, that's felt from the ground. So with that, right, being a successful carer and being a successful migrant, moms really start to redefine themselves. They're starting to feel that, hey, you know, I'm in a more comfortable position now. I can look at, you know, what do I do now? And it is with these two balance of defining themselves, having a healthy identity and mastering all the things that they have to do on a day-to-day basis, that they start to feel empowered for meaningful engagement. So when I mean meaningful engagement, I mean like they're starting to feel like, hey, I can do something for myself. Finally, I can do something for myself. And with this renewed perspective, right, and growing competence, they actually start to take little steps out. And you know how someone was talking, I think it was Peter was talking about carer guilt. You know how, oh, I leave my child in a respite, or I leave somebody somewhere and I need to go and do something fun. They struggle with that, you know, with that leaving their child in somebody's care, especially for Chinese mothers particularly. So then they renew their mindsets and allow themselves, right, to step out of their comfort zone. Not so comfortable, but, you know, the comfort zone, you know what I mean. And together, right, with pillars of support here, I think that, I mean, I have to acknowledge that the moms couldn't have done it if they didn't have supportive spouse. They didn't have friends that share their difficulties. When I mean friends, I mean moms who are in the same spot as them. And also the faith communities around in Melbourne. Without them, and their extended family back in, you know, Korea and Singapore, without those support, right, they couldn't have done it. So it's really the environment plus the policy, the family support, and themselves being willing to change it internally that help them to be empowered and make better changes for themselves. So moms start to realize, hey, I also can be somebody else. So when I was interviewing moms, right, there were moms who became like active volunteer board, like they're in the board of directors of certain organizations, and they became like you know, leaders of advocate groups. And you know, these things that they do, right, actually help them to contribute and feel very meaningful, because they're not just doing it for their child, but they are representing a whole group of moms and themselves as well. So their identity is starting to be shaped differently. And if you look at this a little bit closer, just thought it was a bit of a crowded one, so I thought I'll show you this instead. So for moms, right, once they started to be empowered for engagement and they start to do occupations for themselves, be it a self-care task, be it a, you know, higher level things like, you know, being in boards, you know, advocacy and all that, they felt that it's very therapeutic for them, and that kept them going. There's actually in occupational therapy, we call it a flow experience. You know, they really feel the feedback, the positive feedback from doing that, from contributing meaningfully. And that helps them to continue to feel empowered, continue to grow as in their new identities, and even discovering more. So you can see that confidence that they have coming up as they discover their own skills and passion that they have never seen before. Some of the moms that I've seen, right, are like the high career power moms that, you know, sacrifice they drop their careers and they stay at home to look after their children. So, you know, they felt that pain in the earlier years, but they made a rediscovery of what they could do in that space, a new space that they found for themselves. And moms, right, who were like, you know, all along looking after their children, they also found new space. So I had a mom who started a little workshop and business around her child's needs. So it was to do with, you know, essential oils and all that sort of stuff. And she's doing a really good job and really empowering other people around her and sharing this, you know, how she cared for a child that was very useful for the rest of the carers. So as you can see, the examples I've given you, right, the moms, right, they are creating their new identities. They start to become more conscious of their own personal time and how it helped them to care for their children even better and to continue this very long journey they have ahead of them. So moving on to the second part of the survey I have, right, with mothers from 3 countries. What I found, right, was I think it's not surprising to you that the participants, right, which are mothers of children with disabilities and Chinese background, they had lower mental well-being and lower personal well-being and mental health compared to the general population, and they're at higher risk of mental health issues. I won't be surprised if this is applicable to other kinds of carers, other carers as well. But I'm not going to say for that because I did not do a research on that one. Yeah, but this just means that we have to be, we can be more proactive in prevention, isn't it? We don't need to wait for our mom to become depressed and, show up at the psychologist or the psychiatrist's door to start doing something. Yeah, and there's also a positive correlation between participation in health promoting activities and well-being. I think this is particularly important because that is one way of preventing people from sliding down, isn't it? If we can catch them early and get them to understand, hey, it's important that you do things for yourself. You actually become better and you can last longer, is what we want to tell them. And there was also, of course, in the Chinese community, the role of perceived support and the balance of that perceived stigma and how to handle that, right? That helps them with their mental health, mental well-being. And here is just a little chart, right, to show you the relationship whereby perceived support was in the core of everything. So perceived support affects mental well-being, personal well-being, not surprising, right? And when you have perceived support, you're more likely to participate in health promoting activities. And with all these 3, right, this is where you get, your overall well-being and health, isn't it? So conversely, right, psychological distress and perceived stigma are not useful for well-being. Yeah, so which means that the study finding tells us that we need to get rid of, we need to reduce, I can't get rid of, right? Reduce carer stigma. We need to help them to feel less distress. We need to provide more support so that people feel psychologically supported. This is what this finding means. So what are health promoting activities? I thought I'll just include here because it's quite jargony. I feel like, we talk about it as if everybody knows what are health promoting activities. But basically, it's about personal health care tasks. For example, visiting a dentist, go for a yearly health check, go for your vaccination, things like that, or even just, going to the gym, Yeah, so, and the other health promoting activities would include things like, physical activities with self or with others, or just doing quiet leisure activities with self or with others, and time for yourself, with yourself, socializing with significant people, and spiritual engagement. So this is what we call a health promoting activity. So what's the implication of all my research, in combination, the interviews and survey? I just find that mothers, right, have their capacity to transform through mastery of their roles, renewed mindset, and empowerment to seek their meaningful engagement in life despite difficulties. Pillars of support are extremely important: family, community, professional service, and policies. And from the survey, we already know that maternal well-being can be increased through just looking after the stigma that's associated with caring, and increasing the support base and really helping them to engage in health promoting activities. So what are my recommendations for my research? Definitely culturally tailored programs is important. So even in the space of dementia, I'm sure it's quite slightly different, there will be similarities, but there'll be some culture specific beliefs that we need to target so that they will actually access the services that you have there. And I think it's important to harness the familiar relationships in Chinese culture. What I meant by that is that, how I was saying in collectivist culture, people tend to huddle together. So instead of huddling for a bad thing, but as well huddle it for a good thing. But how do we turn people around? We need to change mindsets. And I think earlier the speaker was talking about literacy and all that, right? I think it's also important to, improve as a community what's happening in this space, what's happening in the carer space, what's happening in, why is it that we have to why is it that stigma exists? Do we need to stigmatize this group of people? So really challenging those beliefs there. And I think it's very, very important to improve peer support access. I think that the earlier speakers have talked about how they were helped, in the process of peer networking. And I think peer networking can't just happen. We need to have platforms. And COVID, I think, has launched us into an online environment whereby, we really have all those things that are setting up now, all kinds of support. And it's helpful, right, for moms, right, who are isolated, or any carers who are isolated, to be able to just, I've got time now, I hop on and I can get someone to talk to. An online platform is really a useful thing that has come up. The other things about how do we facilitate mothers to participate in health promoting activities? Is it about funding? Is it about providing a disability support worker to allow them to actually leave the home to participate in health promoting activities? And also, we want to help moms change mindset, to encourage them, don't feel guilty. Come on, you need to do something for yourself. And provide that support, right, in terms of health services when occupational therapists or doctors or GPs, when they encounter mothers or carers, they need to encourage them openly, right, and explain to them why they need to have time for themselves and encourage them to find a new identity, other identities besides being a carer. So this is just a little program. I'm not going to bore you with that, okay? But this is a little program that I envisioned that came out from my research, and I'm hoping to do a co-design with carers, moving forward, with all these modules, right, to develop them into actually a program. And I find that some of it is probably, although it's for Chinese mothers, but I think some of it is also relevant for carers in general. Yeah, so it includes things like, how do you master your caregiving occupations? How do you enjoy doing things with this person who has got disability now? And, how do you strengthen yourself? How do you explore other life purposes? How do you partner with family and friends? And how do you contribute yourself? And how do you create a new self, in the midst of all these difficulties? So I'm looking forward to taking these findings into the next level in my next phase. Yeah. So thank you so much for listening to me. I hope that is useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, and that was fantastic. I think lots of common themes really coming out around the importance of peer support, and I think your diagram around the themes and sub-themes really kind of brought all of those things together in terms of the groups that you've been looking at. And I think importantly that I think how you termed it, perceived support. So I suppose there is that practical support, some, carers accessing things like the NDIS and other things which you mentioned, but also that other network of support, I suppose, for those that weren't necessarily accessing the NDIS, but the importance overall of that support to lead to that sort of empowerment to do other things. So, yeah, thank you very, very much. It's going to just be now, we invite you just to complete a quick 2-question poll about your experience so far, which will pop up on your screen now. And then we're going to take a short break before our next session. So everyone will be invited back in at about 11:40. To then move into breakout rooms. So if you'd like to complete the quick poll, and then we'll have a quick break and be back here at 20 to 12. All right. I will see you then. So if you get a glass of water, have a quick stretch, and then we'll be back at 11:40. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's coming back from the break now. So welcome back. We're now going to move into a series of breakout rooms for around 20 to 25 minutes. And you'll be allocated a breakout room where you can contribute to further discussion on what we've heard from our fantastic speakers this morning. So there's a number of questions that we're going to be discussing. How can we improve carer identification? How can we support better carer identification? What is needed to make carers feel empowered? And how is carer identity linked to improve mental health and wellbeing for carers? So 4 questions there, but if you don't get to all 4 questions within your groups, that's fine, because if the discussion is rich and fabulous, then that's great. So if you can just await instructions on your screen, and after the groups have concluded, we'll all rejoin the main meeting. If you don't feel comfortable participating in one of the breakout rooms, you're welcome just to wait in the main room until we resume. So we'll leave it at that for the moment. I know there's a couple of questions coming up on the chat, so I think if they can be taken into the breakout rooms for discussion, I think that would be fantastic. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you've had some fantastic discussion. I just wanted to clarify, there was a question, I think, in the chat just around carer identification. So I think at the beginning, I mentioned that we talked about carer identification at the Carer Knowledge Exchange webinar in August last year, and a recording of that's available on the Carer Knowledge Exchange platform. But when we're talking about carer identification, we usually, mean when carers themselves identify themselves as carers and recognise themselves as carers, or where service providers have that recognition of a carer in a caring role. And knowing that with that recognition, whether it's by a service provider, by a carer, or by both, that often leads to then opening up access for supports and services, which is sort of some of the things that we've touched on already through the talks that we've heard this morning. So just in that sort of setting that kind of context and just clarifying that, we're now going to hear a brief overview of the discussion from each of the groups. I think we had 5 groups. So I'm going to go to the first group, and Tish was the facilitator there. So feedback from Tish on that one.
Now, have I got my fabulous note taker colleague there?
Yes, Tish, I'm here. How are you?
Good. Over to you. Are you happy to share from our note sheet? Thank you very much.
Of course, yes. So we covered some really fantastic points in our time in the breakout room, but I think one really kind of standout point was this tension around carer identity and how there may be many parts to one identity and how the carer identity fits in with other elements of the duality of that, and how there can often be some tension or conflict between other identities within oneself. And then we also discussed in a similar vein, just the different tensions between carer identity and how that may interact or relate to the person being cared for. So they were kind of the 2 standout points that we discussed today.
Great, thanks Grace.
Thanks Grace.
Tish. So the second group, Prue.
Peter, my wonderful note taker, will be sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Arpita.
Hello, everyone. So thank you so much for this platform. And we literally discussed, we had an extensive discussion about how to provide, what is the need to make the carers feel empowered. And luckily we had carers and they shared their struggles, they shared their achievements, they shared what are the loopholes. Those services are there, providers are there, but we do lack proper channel of communication. We do have carers who are into caring role for people with physical health need, and we do have carers who are caring for the people who are be diagnosed with mental health issues, and both are 2 different streams, but the channel is different. And that is why there are some, basically we also discussed measure, that what could be the measure that could get done in order to provide right kind of channel or proper communication. So yes.
Okay, thanks, Arpita. Fantastic. So our third group, Mel and Nat.
Yep. So I'm reporting back. So we had similarly to group 1 some conversation about identification and the need for support around redefining your identity when you take on the carer identity as well. We also had some discussion about language and where people may or may choose or choose not to take on the carer identity, and why or why not, people may choose to. And that a really important part is people may identify as a carer to access support, but if there isn't support available, when you're identifying as a carer, that really feeds into that empowerment part. If you're identifying but you can't access the support you need or the recognition or the rights, then there may be some questions about why identify, and then there needs to be kind of reasons to identify in some instances, but great conversation with our group as well.
Thanks, Mel. Group 4, Courtney.
Thank you, Elena. Joanne is going to report back on behalf of our group.
Thanks, Joanne.
Thanks, Elena. Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, we had a fantastic discussion originally around how to get better identification. First, it was just ask. But from that, we had a great conversation about how do you ask, the importance of language, who is asking the question, and to have these processes built into all systems. So we also heard that, you know, some people don't want to identify as a carer. Maybe their other social roles are what they identify with most, and that it can be confusion because the term carer is used in so many different ways. We can have family and friend carers, we can have professional carers, we can have foster carers. So there is, you know, around that term, it can be difficult. We had an important comment is that a lot of carers have come to this through the lens of trauma. So trying to identify within that is really significant. And so we need to build awareness and training across everybody who is working alongside carers to be aware of that, from the people who answer the telephones, the community, all the way through. I just want to throw to my group. Was there anybody else who wanted to make a quick comment? No? Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Elena.
Thank you. Thanks, Courtney and Joanne. And then our final group, Jade, feeding back.
Excellent. Thank you, Elena. Very similar comments, particularly around identity, largely related to the confusion that can come up due to we really love the word hijacked, how there's the hijacking of the word carer particularly for paid care. So the act of caring versus care as an identity then becomes quite problematic in terms of people being able to recognise themselves as carers as not paid carers. In terms of support, we had quite an interesting and really rich conversation talking about the issues around what could be described as a bit more like lip service around support. So quite upper level rhetoric as opposed to practical on the ground assistance, and the majority of the support needed by those in our group, I would say, was very strongly and in bold and underlined planned respite. So the need for just that ability, not just for support for mental health, which is obviously very important, but also to just be able to have that break, which I believe we would all be very strongly in support of.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jade. So lots of, very common themes there around the, support, respite, those kind of things. I like the feedback around, identity and recognition, just ask. It is then about getting people to ask and getting people to, recognise and think about carers, and I think it's what we spoke about and some of the discussion earlier around carers can recognise, but also need, once they go into services and access services, they also need that recognition from the service and support system as well, which is really important. So I think lots of good points there. So probably that's the end of our formal part. So I would like to thank everyone on behalf of Carers New South Wales and Institute for Public Policy and Governance at UTS and the Care and Knowledge Exchange team, who have done an amazing job today, because it takes lots of people behind the scenes to pull all of these bits and pieces together, and everyone has done an amazing job, particularly Tian and Joanne, so thank you. But I'd also like to very much thank all of our speakers today, Peter and Keith in particular for sharing their very personal stories, Sin for her fantastic research and information and great perspective on things, and Catherine Lowry as well for the information around that mental health literacy and the very important project that she's been overseeing. So I think we've started to explore care identity and care empowerment a little bit more. And I think we've had and heard from a lot of different voices and perspectives today, I think, which has been really fantastic. So again, just to finish off from me, saying thank you to everybody. And now I'm just going to hand over to Prudence Granger, and Prue's going to guide everyone through a guided meditation just to end the session this morning. So thank you to everybody, and I'll hand over to Prue, and then that will be the end of our session today. So thank you very much, everybody.
Hi, everyone. I am Prudence, and I am the Care in Residence for the Care Knowledge Exchange, so bringing my lived experience to the forefront of the project. But outside of being a carer and working on this project, I am a yoga teacher. And I think for me in my care journey, having these tools already in my toolkit were very helpful. And I think it's super important to recognize that there's not necessarily always the time to practice these tools such as meditation, yoga, mindfulness. And so the intention is just to offer a short moment, 5 minutes, to rebalance. The discussion is obviously something that can be a little stimulating and maybe sometimes overwhelming. So it's an opportunity to reconnect in. So finding a comfortable seat wherever you are. If you are seated on a chair, making sure your feet are planted firmly on the ground. And as your feet land on the ground, witness what it is you feel beneath your feet, any textures, sensations. And moving from your feet to your sit bones, which are the two pointy parts of your anatomy that press through the cushiness of your buttocks. Feeling them become heavy, connecting into whatever it is you are currently seated on, be it a chair or the earth. From the sit bones, moving your awareness to the crown of your head, so right at the top of your head, and starting to feel as if a piece of string is gently tugging the crown of your head towards the sky, creating space between your vertebrae. And then noticing in general where it is that your body is leaning. So you leaning forward or a little bit to one side. If that's the case, can you start to bring yourself into alignment, into center, drawing the front body into the back, and then feeling the back body sink into maybe the support behind you or the space that is behind you currently. And if you haven't already, you might like to gently close down your eyes and starting to practice what is referred to as sense withdrawal. And so drawing your awareness inwards and allowing it to fall to the experience of the breath within you, your inhale and your exhale. Noticing your naturally occurring breath, not for the purpose of trying to shift, change, or judge the breath, but to witness its quality. What is the pace of your breath? What is its texture? What is its depth? Where can you feel the breath interacting most predominantly in your body? And then perhaps getting curious about this breath. Is there more space for you to expand into on your inhalation? Is there the capacity to slow down your exhalation? And if you are breathing through your mouth, can you concentrate your breath now into the nasal passageway? So allow air to enter and exit through the nose. And as you next inhale, let the inhalation expand first in the belly, and maybe swell into the waist, all the way up into the chest. As you exhale, feel the exhalation descend from chest, waist, returning to where it began in the belly. As you inhale, endeavoring to take up more space. As you exhale, take up more time. And if the mind keeps interrupting your focus, no worries, that's normal. Just gently coax it back to an anchor. That anchor could be a sensation in the body, the feeling of your feet against the earth, or your sit bones against the chair. Or that anchor could be truly witnessing or absorbing the experience of your breath. And the practice of meditation is called practice for a reason. It is not a perfection. And it's not about creating thoughtlessness or completely clearing the mind, but rather getting comfortable with bringing the mind back to a focal point. When the mind wants to run away to what has been or what is to come, gently, gently drawing it back to the here and now, to what it is you can control. In Sanskrit, the practice of breath is called pranayama. And this translates to control of energy, which I think is a beautiful description of what the practice of breath can offer you. Control of one component of your life. And so when everything feels out of your control, out of your hands, bring your awareness to what it is that you have power over. Empower yourself to fully realize each and every breath. And I'll leave you to sit with that practice for the next little while. Every time the mind wanders, coaxing it back to either the sense of the body or the potential of breath. Every time the mind becomes busy or loud, gently, gently draw it back with no judgment. With every inhale that you take up more space. With every exhale, take up more time. 5 more full breaths to anchor into the here and now. And bring your hands to meet. And gently rub your hands together to develop a little bit of warmth between the palms, a little bit of energy or sensation. And then cup your hands over your eyes. Feel that warmth radiate towards your face. Gently blink your eyes open. And taking in first the side of your own hands. And then when you feel ready, slowly move your hands away from your face to reabsorb your environment and the screen in front of you. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat.
Thanks, Prue. Thanks, everybody. See you at the next one.